Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. I've got another great episode for you today featuring Eric Dagati and Mike Perry. Today we're talking all about the principles of program design. Before we get to this episode, here's a word from some of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by CTM Band and CTM Recovery Products. These are the exact soft tissue recovery tools that I'm using on myself and with my patients day in and day out. CTM Band was founded by Dr. Kyle Bowling, a sports medicine practitioner who treats professional athletes, and he was a former guest on the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. You can check out his website at the link below and use the coupon code BRAWN10 to save 10% off your order from CTM Band. Eric, Mike, welcome to the podcast. Really excited to have you both on today.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
For people who aren't familiar with Principles of Program Design and everything you guys are doing over on Principles of Performance podcast, would you mind kind of filling us in a little bit about the two of you and how you all got started on this?
I'll kick it off and then pass it to you, pass the baton. So unfortunately, this is my second time joining Dan on the podcast. And so
poor guy.
So once is lucky, twice is good. I always tell my clients. So, the way we kind of came about this course is Mike and I both have somewhat similar backgrounds in that we didn't come with the traditional route to the fitness world, right? We didn't go and say at 18 years old, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. We kind of fell into it in unique ways. And so we've spent the last, for me, 24 plus years in this industry in a lot of different capacities, wearing a lot of different hats. And so one of those has been being a lead instructor for functional movement systems, teaching the FMS system around the world. And that's where I came to meet Mike. And so we were down actually during the shutdown with COVID, and we were down at FMS headquarters. And we were just talking with some of the leadership at FMS about some ideas for continuing education and what they might want to add onto their curriculum. And then so we're just talking at dinner saying, well, what's the blind spot? What are we missing? Not just in the FMS curriculum, but just in general. Like, we go out and teach around the world, and Mike will tell you about his background, not only with FMS but also with Strong First. But in saying, okay, here's the biggest thing that we notice is that people come in, whether it's they learn the FMS or they learn kettlebells or they take the FRC course or whatever it may be, whatever method course they take, is that they would take it and they wouldn't know how to apply it. Like, it would be a really good thing. It would be a really cool method, but they had no system to go plug it back into. So they would either do one of two things. They would completely abandon it because it couldn't match up with their current session chart or format, or they would just blank out everything they were doing to that point. Now everybody's going to do this from here on in. And so we said, well, let's figure out a way that we can adapt whatever it is that you learn. Well, I don't care. And we always say, I don't care for whether it's Pilates or the West Side method, or it's kettlebells on the strength and conditioning side, or on the clinical side. Dan, I don't care if you've taken a kinesiotaping course or Graston or ART. We want to give you a system of principles to plug that into, that if you're going to use movement and exercise as your mode of improvement, well, there's some questions you're going to need to be able to answer, and there's some boxes you need to be able to check. And so we put together this course that's basically a series of checklists, and we kind of walk you through the journey of everything from day one a client walks through the door all the way down to, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Let me let Perry take the floor, because I'll go down a rabbit hole and never come out.
Yeah, if we could just get Eric to stop talking, that's a win. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so like Eric mentioned, so my background definitely wasn't that traditional sort of, exercise fit background. I went to school for sociology and played collegiate soccer. And then after that, I decided to, slowly integrate myself into the training world. And I was fortunate enough to work at a really, really cool facility where I got exposed to various methodologies early on, and two of the sort of individuals that I really loved learning from and listening to was Gray Cook, and obviously with the FMS system, and Pavel Setsulin, which from a kettlebell standpoint is the guy that really popularized kettlebell training in the US. Obviously there were some other individuals, but Pavel's the guy that really put it out there. And throughout my journey, I just sort of gravitated towards those two sort of methodologies and individuals. And then now I get to a point where I'm on leadership for both companies, where I get to teach, lead instructor for FMS and a senior instructor for Strong First, where I get to go teach barbells, kettlebells, body weight, and stuff like that. And then in addition to that, I get to lecture for Perform Better, which is pretty cool. And then I also own a gym in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, and we've been here for 10 years. So, I've had a lot of experience working with various types of athletes, and working with kids up to professional athletes, Olympians, you name it. But, I think the one thing that Eric and I were really looking into with this whole entire process was, a lot of people, even if they did know how to put a program together, they didn't really have a systematic approach of designing that program. It was more like, well, this looks cool and this looks cool and these look cool together, so let's go from there. So our big thing is questioning people. Why did you make those decisions, and why are you doing that? Because I think a lot of people just assume, well, everybody should have a squat, everybody should have a hinge, everybody should have a lunge. And yes, those are key components of movement, but at the same time, you need to know why you're making those decisions. And a big part of what we do is we run you through, like Eric said, these checklists and these scenarios where we make you think. We essentially put you on the spot to defend, in a way, why you're making those decisions. And quite often, a lot of people don't know why they're making the decisions. And maybe they made those decisions because they heard someone else that was maybe a little bit more prevalent or popular, and they just sort of copied them. So it's about understanding the why. And that's a big part of what we're teaching, because anybody can give you a template of plug and play. Like, here's a press, choose your favorite press. Here's a squat, choose your favorite squat. That's easy stuff. You're not learning anything from a decision-making standpoint. You're just selecting your favorites and then throwing them into a spreadsheet. And for us, it's understanding the why. Like, why are you making these decisions? And you have to really look into various aspects of your athletes and your clients' lives. It's not just about, movement prep and what exercises are cool and this and that. It's about actually stepping back and taking a larger look at what's making those individuals tick, finding their why. Why did they choose to seek out your services to begin with? But also understanding the various aspects of their life, and making coaches understand that, guys, there's more to this than just Excel spreadsheets. And we found that a lot of people just can't write a program. They really just, they threw it together, but they didn't have a systematic approach. And that is where this thing was born from.
Right. I like to say that when every action has a purpose, every action will have a result. And I've seen the same thing that you just talked about. A lot of people, whether it be personal trainer, strength coach, or physical therapist, chiropractor, whatever, a lot of people just give stuff to give stuff, right? It's not specific, it's not tailored, and it's not really necessarily in a system like you're explaining or outlining there. It's more of just, well, we have a sheet, we need to give exercises, we need to fill up this amount of time, whatever it is. So we're just going to throw things in there that, maybe they pertain to the client goal, maybe they don't, but it fills 60 minutes. I can get my $60 an hour or whatever. I can get my 4 units from insurance, whatever it is. And that's doing the patient, the client, whatever it is, a huge disservice, because you're not tailoring your approach specifically to them. And instead, you're just doing things to do them. It's not going to give you the results that you want. I'm curious, you mentioned that you have some kind of checklist that you walk people through to help develop a better system to programming. What exactly do those checklists roughly entail or look like, or what kind of things do you feel people are missing from their programming when it comes to training for general population, athletes, whoever?
So we have checklists almost for every section of the course. And the first section of the course, that what we actually do is we challenge ourselves as professionals. And especially we do this a lot more in the live courses, is very interactive. And we challenge you to, the expression we use is to get out of your silo. And what happens is, for a lot of people, thankfully, you get, where Mike is a super bright guy. He's from the Boston area, so we say he's wicked smart. So he took a different path than most of us take, right? Where if most people say, I get to connect with someone like Pavel or Gray early on in my career, then I become one of their disciples. And all I do is just regurgitate what they say and do. And I never look outside of that. And I get myself in this little silo where I'm comfortable, and everything I do has to match that, right? Has to be pushed in through that filter. Whereas what we're looking to do is to kind of get you to tweak up out of your silo and look in what's in the other ones, and not just be this isolated specialist, but be much more of, as Kelly Starrett says, as a savage generalist. And so we have a thing, an interactive thing that's fun. It's called "What's Your Thing?" Right? So if you're sitting in the front row, Dan, I'm gonna say, okay, what's your thing? Meaning, if someone introduces me to Dan and they say, this is Dan, he's a physical therapist and he's a blank, or he's an ART guy, right? He's a really big into manual therapy, or he's a big into Sarman's work, or whatever it may be, you would get that label slapped to you, right? We get this label of being FMS guy slapped to us, and realizing that's a piece of what we do of a much broader whole. So then what we do is we say, okay, well, we'll take one thing that someone has. And then what we do is we do this Socratic debate, whereas we take you, and let's say your thing is you love the West Side method, or you love, powerlifting. We're going to say, okay, we're going to take you and half the class, and we're going to put you on this side of the room, right? And the other half of the class going to the other side of the room. Now, your team is going to now have to, what you're going to have to do is give us all the reasons why that thing that you do sucks, why it doesn't work, why nobody should ever do it, why it's complete nonsense, while the other side of this room is going to tell you why it's the greatest thing ever, right? And so now what it makes you do is kind of start questioning some of the things we do and the thought processes we have. And then for the person that might have been in the room that might have thought powerlifting is useless, now they have to defend it. And now they have to maybe get outside of their comfort zone and say, well, there actually is some benefit to some of those things and building strength and so forth. So you start to see things through a different lens. And so that kind of sets up the framework of the whole course. And then from there, it's just a checklist for every section. And then Mike, you can kind of walk them down the path from that point.
Yeah. So, and I think one of the things that we're trying to do as well in a world of social media where everybody likes to argue behind their keyboards, I think we have a lot more similarities than we do differences. And that's one of the reasons why we have that debate, because listen, you're not going to call someone a 4-letter word in front of their face. You may do it behind a keyboard, but when you're trying to go to a course and gather information, right, hopefully you're there to have an open mind. So, a big part of that is simply, just agreeing that, listen, we all have different backgrounds and we all have different specialties, but within a given context, those are all good things, right? And the analogy that I always use is the GPS analogy. I'm a big fan of the Waze app. And if I'm driving to go visit Eric in Jersey, I will put the address in, I will know my starting point and my ending point, but depending on what's going on, there could be 5, 6, 7 different ways to get there. And as long as I get there safely and in an effective fashion and without an accident, you know what, I'm doing all right. And I think people forget about that there are different ways, because people get married to what Eric said. They're in their silos, right? They're like, I'm a kettlebell guy. What if someone comes back in and wants to train with you and they don't want to touch kettlebells? Are you still a kettlebell guy? Are you going to tell them no? So I think, again, we challenge people to really defend why they have that specific stance. And a lot of the times it's just because they've invested so much money in a given system or a given product. They don't want to actually maybe kind of troubleshoot and maybe think maybe this stuff doesn't work as well as I thought. And people get upset at that, but I look at it as a learning experience. But so again, we go through and we have checklists on, again, looking at what our favorite things are. We look at the evaluation process, and we don't just talk about the movement screen. Everybody thinks we walk around because we work for FMS with kits in our bag and, our favorite, corrective exercises on tap for everybody. No, we actually dig deeper and we learn about people's home life. We learn about their daily activities, other things that they're doing. We actually run through this entire checklist where we ask so many questions because we need more information. The more information that we have on that given individual, it will allow us to make better decisions from a programming standpoint. One of the things Eric always brings up in the course is, let's say you're working with someone and they're a laborer and they're a mason or something. They do brickwork all day. Pretty sure they don't need farmer's carries in their program, right? I mean, those are the things that we have to really think about. You have someone that runs, 70, 80, 90 miles a week. They probably don't need running in their program. So we have to ask more questions, and then we have to just be quiet and let those individuals answer, because it'll give us better insight on what they need and what their biases are, right? Because that's a thing that people don't understand as well. And again, it's more fact finding on everything, and that will allow us to give our clients and our athletes better results in the long run.
And I'll backtrack for a second here. One of the first things you said was about, online, it seems like people are too caught up in the keyboard ranger game right now. And we pick fights with people over stuff that really doesn't matter in the long run. a long time ago, back in January, I talked with Eric, and he had this analogy he called the rocks in the jar analogy, where we get so caught up arguing over what we consider sand in the jar, small things that doesn't really take up too much space, as opposed to the rocks in the jar, the big things in life, right? So who cares if sumo deadlift is better than conventional deadlift or vice versa? I know I have a client who just walked in. They were a power lifter for 10 years and they deadlifted conventional. So guess what? If I program deadlifts for them, they're going to get conventional because I'm not going to undo 10 years of programming, 10 years of training a specific movement pattern overnight, right? It's going to take so long. It's probably not even going to be worth it for me to teach him sumo deadlift at that point, depending on his goal. The second piece I really like is that you get to the root cause of things, right? You actually look at the entire person instead of just, well, here's what they want to do and here's a program to get them there, right? You know, if I have someone who walks in and says, yeah, I want to lose 20 pounds, I want to lose 30 pounds, I can light them up with HIIT or, you know, low intensity, steady state cardio all day long. But if the reason that they're overweight to begin with is the fact that they're sleeping 4 hours a night and their diet is crap, then I can't magically out train that in the gym. So you have to get to that root cause of whatever it is that someone's coming to see you for. And if you don't, you're never going to make those long lasting impacts or those lasting gains that you need to. I'm curious too, you mentioned that you have a background with FMS, you have the kettlebell background. I know Eric has a background with On Base U as well. You both have a big background in the realm of assessment. And you mentioned that you don't just walk around and assess and give corrective exercise. Have you noticed that people struggle to connect what they see with where they need to take their program? Or do you think that, you know, a lot of people can very easily connect, this is what I see and this is what I'm going to do? Do you think that people need to spend more time on that program creation side, or do you think people are pretty seamlessly flowing into program creation and assessment?
Well, I'll
Eric,
jump
you
in
want
on
to take
that.
this, bud?
Yeah, there's a couple problems, and there's a section we have on data collection and interpretation. And the first thing that was most shocking to us is we did 2 pilot live courses, and we did 1 official live course so far. So in doing those courses, when we would ask in the room to say, okay, what are your non-negotiables? Meaning that if I'm going to come in and train with you, or I'm going to get treated by you, Dan, what are the things you need to know about me, right? And so with that, what are like the key things, your key evaluations, assessments, you know, things that you need to find out? And we got more blank stares than we did answers, more definitive answers. And so like, then it starts to ask us like, well, how do you even know where your starting point is if you don't have some sort of baseline to go by based on your data collection and your testing? So that's the one big thing is, well, they don't even know what the scoreboard is, right? So if you came in and you are that person that wants to lose 20 pounds, okay, well, what's your baseline? Are you going to do an in-body? Are you going to do circumference measurements? Are you going to do calipers? Like, what's going to be your way of knowing you got to your goal? Because if not, we're just putting the car in drive and going without any GPS, right? And not knowing when we get there. The other big thing is we have these places, and this is one of the big gripes that I hear from athletes. They'll go to these places that are super high tech, and especially because in the baseball world, we get this, where, you know, they'll go to this facility and they'll give the super in-depth evaluation to them. And then then it would get a program, and it was exactly the same program that everybody else got anyway, right? And they never went back and retested. And I think one of the big challenges with testing is we're scared of failure, right? We're scared that we're going to not get the result we wanted. That what happens, God forbid, that you came in to get faster and I retest you and your speed hasn't changed in 2 weeks, or you came in to move better and your movement hasn't changed. Whereas I think, and it's, I guess somewhat is a matter of maturity over years, but I have no fear of failure with that stuff, because if I'm going to check it in a systematic way, that if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail fast with feedback, right? And so that way I'm going to know if this isn't working, I want to find out now. I don't want to wait 6 months and then you have this big retesting day and then we realize, well, nothing really happened. And so that's where I think the data collection and the screening and the evaluation is a process that people are very intimidated by, because they either A, like you said, they can't connect the dots. B, they they're scared that they're going to not be able to show information, or they don't have a systematic way of even doing their testing to know that like there's certain things that I need to know about you before we even get started. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the testing thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you brought up that you shouldn't be scared to test again, right? You should be willing to say, I have a great program. I'm willing to find out if it's working or not working. And if you find out it's not working within 2 to 3 weeks, hey, no harm, no foul. Change your approach, right? It's the kind of thing where, say someone comes in and they have tight hip flexors and you found out that they're tight because they have a weak core. You actually got to the root cause of it instead of just saying, well, let's just stretch the hip flexors all day long. And maybe you're doing a plank progression to help strengthen their core. And you find that that's not really working for them. Well, maybe it's not working because they don't know how to engage their core. And if you test in 2 weeks, you'll catch that. And then you'll be able to reset, teach them how to engage their core, teach them how to properly brace, feel what you want to feel, and then build back up from there. But if you never test that, you end up 4 months down in, and all of a sudden you realize that you don't have much progress, or in some cases, maybe you made the condition worse because you're not getting what you want from it. And you just completely ignored that because you weren't willing to test if what you're doing is effective or not. So I like that you're willing to, test yourself. I like that you actually incorporated that into your course as well. You say that, I'm a West Side guy, or I'm a 531 guy, or whatever it is. You make people defend the goods of that and the negatives of that. And not many people can do that, or not many people can play both sides of that, right? Everyone will, say, well, this is my approach because it worked for me. And we end up with a lot of people who get, as you mentioned before, biased to their own ways, instead of people who can kind of flow through the spectrums of exercise, right? Everything's on a spectrum. Some people are addicted to the barbells, and some people are addicted to the calisthenics, and you got different things in between. So if you're willing to adapt and think outside the zone that, you yourself have been brought up to train with, and you actually can understand different systems and apply different training systems, that makes you much more effective as a coach, trainer, therapist, chiro, whatever. And it's going to get your clients a lot further. And it shows that you actually have true expertise and knowledge of training, and you're not just someone who's going to throw the same thing at people and expect the same result, right? It doesn't work that way. You cannot just do the same thing and expect a different result.
Yeah, I think that if there's one thing that I've really noticed about people when it comes to program design and exercise selection, it's if it's like one of those things, if you're constantly searching for the same thing, you'll eventually find it. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think a lot of people are, number one, unwilling to admit that they wrote a program that wasn't as impactful as they thought it could be. Because I tell people all the time when I'm working with them, hey, I'm going to write your initial program, but it's going to take me a few weeks to refine your program, because I'm going to give you some exercises that may or may not be beneficial. And that's okay, because we don't come with owner's manuals, right? There isn't a concrete way to do things. So I always tell people it's going to take me a little bit of time to really sort of dial in where we're going to be. And there's going to be some changes made. And I may put an exercise in there and I thought it was going to go well, and maybe it didn't go as well as I wanted to. But listen, I'm not biased towards that one exercise. It's not like I have to put those in and force feed them. And I think that happens with a lot of people is, they only have success in one system, so everybody gets the same system. But really the good clinicians or the good coaches, I always say we want to be able to look at training with different lenses, right? So if your background is FMS, well, you're going to have the FMS lens. Well, if your background is PRI, you're going to have the PRI lens. But if you understand the principles behind all of these various systems, you can actually step back and be like, oh, maybe that is something that I should look into. So, and again, I think the big thing is definitely that emotional bias. And I think the emotional bias also comes from the financial bias, because they spend so much money on courses and they don't want to be like, yeah, I spent 10 grand on those courses and they suck. Like, no one wants to admit that. And it's okay. That's the cool thing about it. Like, this is a learning process. And even though you may not take a ton from that system to where you are today, it's still part of your process in becoming a better coach or a clinician. So maybe it's not going to give you a ton of value as to what you're doing today, but it also shaped you as a coach to allow you to make better decisions. And maybe you'll just say things like, you know what, man, I spent $5,000 on that course and it was not worth it. And that's okay, because now you can make that decision, and it's not a blind decision. You actually have the firsthand experience.
Right. As you mentioned before, failure becomes part of the recipe for success forward, right? Just because you came up short in one avenue does not mean all that time or money or whatever was a complete waste. Sometimes that becomes part of your process to move forward. And I like that you brought up the financial side, because one of the things I found about your course, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than most courses I've seen these days. Most courses are like literally $1,000 plus, and yours is less than half of that, which for, the trainers and that sort of thing who are listening, you have to ask yourself, is what I'm getting going to be worth it? And in this case, you've got two guys that have over 50 years of experience, and you're going to get knowledge from them for literally less than half the cost of most other courses. And that alone should speak volumes, because, even the course game, some people are in the course game for money because they know, different people will, their companies will reimburse them for it or that sort of thing. And I can walk out of there with, $1,000 or $2,000 a head, whatever. And it doesn't seem like you guys are like that. It seems like you guys both want to make a positive impact, and you're not really focused on the dollar amount as much as some of the other companies can be.
Yeah, like even with our preview course, like we put together a preview course for the online thing, and it's funny because we're looking at trying to figure out the marketing thing, and Mike and I are coaches at the end of the day. We spend the bulk of our days coaching, and so we're talking about marketing things, and everybody's got you look on social media or in online, it's the top secrets to better programming, and it's like, I suck at secrets. So let's just take our course. I'll take the best, some of the highlights and cut it down to 20 minutes, and people could check it out. And if they like what we say, then they'll buy the next thing. And if they like that, then they'll come see us live, and we're going to build on it. We're going to go down. We're going to make it a little bit, we're this big umbrella of principles. We're going to make it a little bit more refined, and like we have something we're working on specific to adult group fitness. We're going to do specific things to different populations. So it's going to grow, but it's been fun kind of having just, being able to have a sounding board like Mike, and, to be able to go back and forth and kind of do these different things and share thought processes of how would we do this, and keep saying, and really what it is we explained right in the beginning of the course is this is 50 years of mistakes, right? 50 years of us screwing this up. And I wish I had me to teach, this to me 20 something years ago, so I wouldn't have to go and make all these mistakes. So.
Yeah, I think if there's sort of, one thing that we are really trying to do is to make a positive impact. And we also understand that there's a lot of these young, coaches and trainers that, don't have the money to go out there and drop thousands and thousands of dollars. And, for us, it's really about the principles of programming. And that's the name of the course. And, this isn't going to be the only one. There's going to be several other sort of specialty things we're going to eventually work on. But if you do not understand the principles, then you're not going to be able to make better decisions, whether you're working with golfers, whether you're working with baseball players, whether you're working with adults. And that's why we started with this course. It's to give people the information so they can step back and not be so biased towards all these methods, but understand the principles behind it. And one of the analogies that we use in the course is weight loss. Everybody with half a brain knows that in order to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. That's just how it is. Like, there's not going to be too many people that are going to argue about that. Yes, there will be some people because they just like to argue. But at the same time, you could be in a calorie deficit with the ketogenic diet, with the intermittent fasting, with the zone diet, with, some sort of primal diet. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever you like, cool. But if you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight. And that's the thing people don't understand, is the principle is calorie deficit. The method is whatever worked for you. So when people are like, what do you think of the ketogenic diet? I'm like, cool. What do you think of intermittent fasting? Cool. Like, if it works for you, do it. And people are searching for the concrete answer. They're searching for the mathematical black and white answer. It just does not exist with human beings. It does not. So that's why we're like, listen, these are the principles. And as long as your methods match up with these training principles and these programming principles, you're going to do okay.
Right, exactly. And there's room for you to be creative and think outside the box within those principles. It's not to say that, if you want to do overhead stability with an athlete, that you have to limit yourself to barbell and dumbbell overhead work, right? You can get creative and think outside the box. But I think another element to that you guys hit on from your past experiences is the fact that you've developed programs in the past for athletes specifically, right? There's a big difference between training someone who goes to the gym and wants to build muscle or wants to get into bodybuilding, that sort of thing, and someone who wants to get better throwing a baseball, for example. So I might give a bodybuilder overhead presses with barbells or dumbbells or that sort of thing, but I might give the baseball player something like a 90-90 bottoms up kettlebell press, or I might give them some kind of external rotation resisted uppercut with a band, and I can do all kinds of different things from that, right? It's a lot more sport specific than just giving them the same thing over and over and over again. Yes, the barbell overhead press will build strength, and you can modify it with the earthquake setup, the bamboo bar, whatever, to give more of a stability demand. But at the end of the day, that's not the same position that the athlete is going to need. And I think that the two of you having the background working with athletes and working with so many different sports like you have can kind of intertwine that with your own course and teach people that, there's a better way to do things that matches the demands of sport or life for that matter, right? If you get someone who's maybe a little bit older and they just want to stay in shape, they don't want to fall, maybe they're, osteopenic or something like that, like you can literally develop a well put together program to help keep people strong, increase bone density, improve balance, all of these things, and help prevent the decline that can come with age, unfortunately. But you have to know what life demands they're going to have, and you have to be able to match exercises appropriately to that.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about checklists, the big part that everybody gets excited for is we have a program builder and a workout builder, because workouts and programs are two different things, right? Program is where the magic happens. And the irony is that same systematic checklist, it doesn't matter whether Mike's training one of the top UFC fighters in the world, or I'm training a professional baseball player, that it's the same system. It's the same checklist, right? We have a 10-point checklist of these are the things that you need to consider in your program, right? And with that, there's a hierarchy of what's most important. And then there's also sections that we break it into. So like our top section it's the client's goal, it's time, how much time you have to get to the goal, how much time they have to train, as well as what are their special considerations in terms of lifestyle, history, that kind of stuff. All that we say is created by the organism. You don't get to pick that, right? You don't get to pick how many days they train. You don't get to pick what their history was. You don't get to pick what their goal is. So that is what the organism is bringing in. The next section is based on nature. It's based on science. When we look at your movement and we look at reps and sets and all that kind of stuff, when we look at exercises in those sort of things, that's kind of based on somewhat on the environment. What is the environment that they need to be in or that they're training in, right? If I give you the greatest workout in the world, but it has all specialized stuff that you don't have in your gym or the place you're going to, doesn't matter. And then the last things are nature. The nature is reps, sets, and all that stuff. That's pretty much determined by physiology. Like doing, 20 reps of power cleans just doesn't make sense on any level, let alone I want to develop power, right? Because that's not going to happen doing a 2-minute set. So that's how we and then we go into the actual writing of a workout with a 5-point checklist for that we call the 5 Fs. And so now, it doesn't matter who I'm working with, I just push it up against this checklist and say, okay, am I meeting all of these marks? And if I'm not, that's going to be the blind spot. That's going to be the hole in my program that's going to, hold us back.
Right. I like that you bring that up, because at the end of the day, there's certain elements that every program is going to have different. And you mentioned that workouts are very different than programs, but there's certain elements that need to be a commonality amongst every program. So you mentioned that, I'll take that back. Not every program, but almost every program. So you mentioned, I wouldn't give like 20 reps of cleans to someone. And I think a lot of trainers and physical therapists and just that sort of thing that I've seen in my own experience neglect what we call quadrant 1 or general physical prep, for those who are familiar with Pavel there. So basically we start giving things like the, Olympic lifts, the single event, power lift type exercises, or a military press or something like that, to someone who struggles with doing a basic plank or can't do 10 push-ups, right? So making sure that you walk before you can run, so to speak, and hit the general physical movements before you get into the more advanced progressive ones. And again, like we've talked about extensively in the podcast, this is not like the specific way you should go. Everyone is going to present differently. And it doesn't mean that you start everyone in quadrant 1. Some people might be doing the general physical prep on their own, as you mentioned before. Some people might be doing their own calisthenic program. Some people might be doing yoga or running or something like that outside of your time there. But it's important to make sure that you don't neglect the level 1 stuff before you jump right to the level 100 stuff.
Absolutely.
I'll let you jump in.
All right. No, that's fine. So, I think there's a couple things. So I think people don't really understand where they're truly at when it comes to their physical conditioning and their capacity. I think everybody knows where they want to be, but not too many people know where they're actually starting from. Right? Everyone sort of has a lot of people have an inflated idea of where they're actually at. But, I think what's happened in the last sort of 10 plus years in this industry, especially with social media, is I think that people think that they can hack and be, biohacking, and they can skip steps to get to the end result. And if you look at just kind of how we develop, whether it's a physical development or emotional development or anything, we thrive on progression. The problem is for some reason, when it comes to exercise, people think they can skip steps, right? And I think that's because of the internet. They think they could just biohack their way through everything. And if you look at sort of how we develop as children, right? We start sort of in that supine position, and then we go to this whole neural developmental sequence. And yes, we crawl before we walk, right? And then we walk before we run. But for a lot of people, they skip steps. They think, well, I want to go do CrossFit and do hang cleans. Dude, you don't even know what a deadlift is. You don't know what a squat is, but you think that you're ready for exercises that are being showcased in the Olympics. Like, this is absolutely bananas. And I think the idea of skipping steps is something that seems attractive, but what ends up happening is people usually get injured, or they have to go back and fix their work anyway. So I think if you truly want to be successful in sort of any endeavor, skipping steps is not the way. You have to learn as you go, because the journey is where you actually learn the most about that the journey is where you learn the most. And that's one thing I think people just often misunderstand. So it's like, take your time and just slow down a little bit and earn your right to make that next step. Don't just jump it because it looks cool.
Right. I love that. Earn your right. And at the end of the day, too, a good coach should be able to help you take any movement and regress it all the way down to the point that you're currently at. So if your goal is to deadlift 400 pounds, but you've never deadlifted a day before in your life, then maybe start with just a basic hinge with a PVC pipe. And then the next step will be take the pipe away. And the next step would be, start adding like a light dumbbell or kettlebell or something and build the entire progression. But again, it takes knowledge as a strength coach or expert or whatever to be able to take a movement and regress it all the way back down to its simplest form that the person standing in front of you can do right now. And I'm willing to bet that you two might agree with this, that not every trainer, strength coach, therapist, chiropractor has the ability, at least right now, to take a movement like that and regress it down to its most basic form.
And we were talking about this the other day. We do an Instagram live every week that we've been doing for the last couple of months, and we talked about this topic last week of meeting minimums of certain things you should be able to mark, you should be able to hit, whether it's progression of what gets you to do a pull up or marks that we look for from a conditioning standpoint. But the thought hit us both at the same time. It's like, at the end of the day, we don't really care what's in your program. Like we don't get a kickback, or, we don't get nobody, the exercise council of the world doesn't send me a nickel every time I program a chin up. Like, I don't care at the end of the day what you do. Like, my goal is to get you to get results. So I have no emotional investment in any one thing and giving that to you. Right. And so that's really where people don't understand that. Like, I don't really care what you do in your program. I'm going to find out. And we talk about, a lot of my checklists are three things. I need to know your past. What has happened up until you walked in this door? Your medical history, your injury history, your training history. I need to know your present. Like Mike talked about, where are you at right now in terms of your movement competency, your body composition, your physical capacities right now. And then the next thing is, what's your future? What do you need this to look like? What environment are you going into? What are you going to ask of your body? And then from there, that's where we kind of build the program. And that's that methodical approach. And I always say at the beginning of the course that our goal is at least once, if not 100 times during the course of the day, that you stop and say, oh, I either one of two things. Wow, I never thought of that. Or, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. But we get drawn to the shiny objects, right? And that's, we've had this discussion about, social media and what we have to compete against. We're all of this, what seems like makes a lot of sense stuff. At the end of the day, we also have to recognize the reptilian brain that we all have. And that as much as this all makes sense and, oh, I never thought of that. At the end of the day, we still get drawn to cartoon characters eating organ meats with their shirt off in the middle of the woods, right? That's unfortunately what we're competing against on a daily basis.
Right. And it's almost like that kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, extreme stuff is going a little bit better for some people. Like, they feel drawn to it, they feel attached to it. Like, wow, I've never seen this before. Like, this is interesting. When in reality, like, you could also build muscle with a few basic exercises and a basic progressive overload, at least if you're new and you've never exercised before, right? Start simple, but it doesn't look as cool, right? And I think that's another piece we didn't talk about yet, is sometimes programming or sometimes exercises can get a little bit boring or repetitive or redundant. Like, I think for the past 2 or 3 years, I've done pull-ups as part of my own workouts for, 2 to 3 times a week for years. And, that can get a little bit redundant, doing the same exercise or a variation of the same exercise over and over and over again, but it matches my goals. I'm able to progress it and overload it as I need, and it matches the direction that I want to go. So naturally, I'm going to keep doing it. And sometimes, yeah, I think outside the box and I throw a new twist on it, a new variation or something like that. But ultimately, it's a very similar exercise over and over and over again. And you don't have to get too fancy with it. You don't have to get overcomplicated with it. I'm sure we've all seen some clip of some guy like literally strapping a weight bench and like 3 bands and like putting a girl over his shoulders or something like that, and then repping out an exercise before, right? They make it this big, flashy, showy thing, when in reality, it doesn't have to be that in order to give you the results that you're looking for, regardless of your goal in the gym. You don't have to or in fitness or health or whatever, you don't have to get lost in the fancy sauce that we are seeing online over and over again.
Yeah, it's entertainment. That's all it is. It's the best coaches in the world that have a proven track record, guys like Mike Boyle, Eric Cressy, Gray Cook in the world of PT. It's a lot of the same stuff over and over again, and it's boring. It's absolutely boring. So the question, and I say this to people all the time, are you looking to get results or be entertained? So if you're looking to get results, I can do that for you. If you want to be entertained, go watch a movie or go watch these people. Why do you think viral videos are so impactful, right? Because it's entertainment. We're not looking at that going like, there's this guy, I forget what his name is, but again, he's doing weighted pull-ups with benches hanging off of him, people. And the guy's, probably monetizing it like a madman, but at the same time, it's not going to help you with your training. It's entertainment. And I think people need to differentiate it. And that's one thing people do not do is the most successful athletes in the world do the same stuff, or it's almost to the point of being bored, but no one wants to see someone doing the same thing over and over again because it's not entertaining. So social media is simply entertainment. I would, there are a lot of individuals that provide great content, but for the most part, it's simply entertainment. That's all it is. It's and unfortunately, people assume that if it's fancy, that it's going to work better, but people just, they want to be entertained, and they enjoy that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But don't be surprised when you're not getting any results because you just keep on doing all these dumb workouts that have no rhyme or reason.
Exactly.
Now, something that I'll kind of throw in there that we also need to consider is that we're the ones that geek out on this stuff, right? And we could spend all day talking about what, putting together case studies and programs. Is that the vast majority of our human population is not exercising, right? Especially here in the Western world in the US. Like, we're just not exercising, right? There's more gyms, there's more trainers, there's more workouts, there's more available for you to access and to get fit, to get healthy, to have optimal wellness. And yet we're the sickest, most unfit that we've ever been as a population. And so our industry really is doing a lousy job of doing it. And so there needs to be not necessarily exercise and entertainment, but there needs to be something that drives people to keep showing up the next day. And your number one statistic, the number one metric you can have is, does your client keep doing it? And we talk a lot about habits. So we talk a lot about creating buy-in and all those sorts of things, and creating awareness. And those are some of the bigger keys that people don't get. Like, they did trainers, coaches, they don't understand, like, that 90% of the world doesn't really give a crap whether you give a trap bar deadlift or whether you do a kettlebell deadlift. They don't care. They want to get it in, get it over with. They just want the results, right? They don't. And so we're investing so much time, again, arguing about that sand, where we're missing the point that we need to do something to create a connection. Like, even we had this discussion talking about adult group fitness. What Mike has up at Skill of Strength in Massachusetts, he's created an incredible community. He's created, something so much more powerful than I come in and do a workout. Because if all he was doing, come in and do a workout, I can go to F45, I can go to Orange Theory, I can go to all these places and just get workouts. So why do they keep failing? That's just as much a part of program design as anything else. Is your number one success metric is that person keeps showing up.
And if they don't keep showing up, then you've got a problem. And I guess that kind of leads me into another point I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. Some people in the past that I've worked with have requested every workout be a little bit different because they don't want to do the same thing day in and day out over and over again, as is common with many strength programs. So from your experience, are you two both okay with that? If someone comes in and says, hey, I want things to be different every time, do you go, yeah, of course, we can, give you 1,000 different exercises. We can do 5 this day, 6 this day. We can, endless modifications. Or are you more along the lines of, we're going to keep a similar structure, but we can change little things each time?
Yeah. So I'm actually brutally honest with people when they come through the door, because the last thing I want to do is sign them up for something that they don't want. So I explained to them during the consultation process, this is how we do things. And you're right, there are some people that want a ton of variety, but I explained to them, listen, I'm okay with giving you variety from a metabolic conditioning standpoint, because with our adult group training standpoint, if we're being brutally honest, adult group training programs are just hopefully really good, well thought out GPP. That's all it is. So I always tell people, your strength training stuff is going to be really consistent. Like, you're going to see a lot of the same things over and over again, but I'm okay with giving you a bunch of different exercises in your metabolic conditioning, because that's where I'm okay if you do different things. I really am. So for me, that's where I sort of make changes. And that's just a big part of what I do. So, and explain to people, as long as it's safe and as long as they're getting what they want, I'm cool with it. But I'm okay with a little bit of variability with their metcons and stuff like that. But when it comes to strength training, this is how we do it, and we know how to get people strong. And I really don't change things up. And I think for most people, having that variety is good enough for them. And if people are looking to just show up and be surprised every time, I just tell them to go to a CrossFit.
Yeah. I don't think it has to get to the level of like, hey, I'm going to roll a dice with exercises on it, right? But the more specific your goal, the more specific your program's going to be. And so if you're just coming in looking for general fitness, then you know what? Then I can have a huge amount of variability within there, because you don't really care how much your bench press gets to. So we can have 5 different pressing variations within there. Now, if your goal is to, change body composition, which we want to add some lean body mass, well, that's going to come down to number 1, your nutrition. And then number 2 is we're going to put you in a rep range, in a work rest range that's going to optimize that. Now, the cool thing with that is like you can gain muscle, and Andy Galpin just did a wonderful job on Andrew Huberman's podcast. So you can gain muscle with anywhere from 6 reps up to 30 reps. That gives me a ton of variability, right? So right within there, we can have a bunch of different variability baked within your program. The only thing that I'm not going to sacrifice variability for is not meeting the minimums first. And what I mean by that is, if you have really, really lousy shoulder mobility, that limits your menu, right? Mike does a great job of talking about this in a section of the course, talking about driving down narrow lanes, right? So if you're driving down a super narrow lane, the slightest mistake, you're going to crash into stuff, right? And so if someone doesn't have a good foundation and they don't have a lot of resiliency built within them and don't have a really robust physical profile, their lanes are pretty narrow, and so their selection is pretty simple. Whereas the more resilient and the better their movement competency and their physical capacity gets, the wider your lanes are, and we can get a little bit more adventurous. But that's really not going to be determined by me. That's going to be determined by you. And so I say, if you want to have more exercise variability, you got to move better. You got to get better physical capacity. So check those boxes first, and that opens up the menu. And you can go from a menu that looks like, you go into a pizza place that serves pizza, and it's just a matter of a couple different toppings, or you could go to the Cheesecake Factory where it's an encyclopedia of a menu, right? So that really is determined by the person. That's not so much determined by me, because I need to make sure you hit certain minimums.
Right. I love that you bring that up. And the biggest thing I think a lot of people forget, and again, this is my own experience, a lot of people forget to look outside of the sagittal plane. So when we assess and when we give exercises, it almost always comes down to forward and back, right? Squat, step up, or lunge, like forward lunge, backward lunge, bench press, overhead press, pull up, row. It's all forward and backward. And then as soon as you look in the frontal plane or transverse plane, all of a sudden the motion is a lot less than what we desire. And I think it is essential, as you said, and as we talked about earlier, you have to hit that movement minimum. You have to hit that general prep, because if your body can't move in multiple planes, then it is going to be a recipe for disaster. And that's another thing that kind of pertains to a lot of different goals, right? If I have an athlete or a fitness influencer, whatever term we're using these days, who has trash rotator cuff strength, right? I might not pick that up with a simple like overhead shoulder flexion type pattern, but I would certainly pick it up with internal external rotation. But how many people are looking at internal external rotation of the shoulder before we start giving bench press, right? So it's, again, getting to the root cause like we talked about earlier, and making sure your program design gets to the specific things that that athlete needs or that individual needs. And as we've talked about at length, I think you guys have done a great job at kind of setting the stage for people to recognize what they know, recognize what they don't know, and start filling in the gaps to individualize a program towards the person sitting directly in front of them and picking up on those things that might go overlooked otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into it. And that's really the goal of what we're trying to do is to educate, younger trainers, but also trainers that perhaps have been stuck in their habits and, saying things like, well, this is how we've always done it. And, that can be a barrier to learning, right? So there's always opportunities to learn. And even as we've done this course, we have our online course, we're still making changes every time we teach, because we're going, you know what, I think this works better, or maybe we should add this instead and take this out. It's an ever evolving process. And I think that's, as a coach, I always, when I'm working with younger coaches that are asking me questions, I say to them, hey, listen, 80% of what I do is I'm going to stick with, but that 20%, that last 20% is always constantly evolving, and that's something that I believe in is if the meat and potatoes are there, cool, you can change the seasonings and you can, change some of the other sides, but know that your principles are firm and sturdy, and then you can start sort of playing with some of the other smaller components that will allow you to give your athlete a little bit more specificity based off of their goals and needs.
For sure.
The other thing I would add is that we talk about, there's this kind of 4 primary quadrants that we address this to, and the easiest one is the one-on-one fitness, and that's the easiest lane to be in. Or even the next layer would be the one-on-one athlete. They need a little bit more specificity. But we also have to talk about, how do you handle groups like I deal with in a athletic setting. I'm going to see 2 high school teams this afternoon, or groups like Mike sees in the adult group fitness realm. And how do we program off of that? And really teaching you more about being a problem solver. I had an interesting experience last night where a guy who I've worked with over the years just got a new job at a pretty big high school football program in the area. And then we had a coaches meeting last night and talking about how we're going to, what are the things we need to do, because we're on really short notice, because just practicing to start in a couple of weeks, and realizing to say, okay, if I came in, barrels blazing, like I might have done 20 years ago, and say, well, here's all my methods and all my things that we need to implement, it would have just completely got me pushed out of the room. Right. And so when they said, well, what do we got to do? What are we going to, what's the lifting going to look like? And I said, look, we have to work backwards here. All right. December, we want to be playing in a state championship, right? That's the end goal of all this. And so I need to find out, what have they done until this point? And the guy says, well, they've been doing really good stuff. They do bench and squat and clean. All right, great. Well, even if those numbers are off the roof and they had, through the roof, and they have a great record board up, that doesn't necessarily equate to winning state championships all the time. Right. And so we have to look at, what are the things that you don't have, right? What are the things that are, and the number one thing is, we got to make sure we got to do everything in your possible to make sure you actually have a team to field in December. So we have to do whatever we can do. Are you doing every possible thing actively to keep your team healthy? That's number one. Next thing we have to look at is, are you meeting the demands of the sport? Right? They're not rolling benches and squat racks out into the field. So are we meeting demands of the sport and fill in the gaps there? And then even bigger than that on a macro level, say, you have to teach them a whole new system. They have to get accustomed to new coaches. Time is going to be a significant issue. So I can't do all the things that I want to do. Would I love to be able to go in and bring in a staff and put movement screens on everybody? Would I love to be able to go and set up, VBT monitors on every single rack? Would I love to be able to do all this? That would be awesome. That's not reality. And what we're trying to teach you to be is a problem solver. Say, here's the situation, here's reality. Whether it's, this is a high school football team and this is a situation you have to put together, or this is a woman who comes in, and we have case studies we do. And here's a woman who comes in who's a mom, who's a business person, who's a very active person, but she's got these structural issues she's working around. This is her fitness goals. This is her time restrictions. Figure it out. Right. And most of the times that doesn't fit into the nice little, format that we were given in school, or we were given in our weekend certification, because, those are built around people that are perfect and ready and willing to work out, and they're going to stick with your program. We're kind of teaching a little bit of the reality of how to be a problem solver. And we go through your case studies. We're brutally honest with people, where we break you into groups, and, especially in a live course, break into groups, say, all right, write a program for this person. And then we say, well, you missed all these things. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? You didn't put this in there. You gave her this, and she specifically can't do that. And really kind of getting people to get challenged in their process, to say, this isn't as simple as just throwing a bunch of exercises and reps and sets together. This is not a plug and play template thing like Mike talked about. This is challenging to say that most of the things that I've screwed up over the years is because I missed something, and we're going to make sure you don't miss anything.
Eric, Mike, this has been an amazing discussion about all things relating to program design and your course and your own past experiences relating to strength and conditioning. Do either of you have any closing thoughts or closing remarks that you want to mention?
Be curious. I think that's something that someone said to me early on, and be willing to poke holes in what you do. Look at what you do, then look at what other people do, and see how things are different, because listen, success leaves clues. So don't be afraid to poke holes in your own system and figure out ways to do it better. And so many people are just concerned about being right. And honestly, it doesn't matter if you can argue a little bit better than someone on the internet. Like, what matters is the people who are paying you. So take your time, do your due diligence, check those boxes, create systems and checklists. And obviously that's what we do within our course, but it's just going to take time. And if you're passionate about making a difference in someone's life, you're going to be willing to put that work in to become a better coach or a clinician.
So the longer I've been doing this, the more my two favorite answers are, I don't know, and it depends, right? So Dan, you call me tomorrow, say, could you put together a program for me? I want to have this goal of body composition, or this goal, I want to accomplish this athletically. What are we going to do? I don't know. Okay, well, are we going to do Olympic lifts? I don't know, right? Well, we're going to be doing a lot of any hit work, and I don't know. Until I know kind of a little bit more about you, I'm really just guessing. And if you want me to give you just a workout, well, then go on YouTube, go on, you get that for free on social media if you just want a plug and play workout of the day. I don't do that. And then if you ask me the question about any of the things you say here, well, are any of those things good? It depends, right? Olympic lifts are great, but I don't put them in with my high school programs because I'm not there every day to teach and monitor those things. And I can't trust that the offensive line coach that's going to actually be there and monitor the workout knows how to correct and oversee and teach those things. So doesn't take away the value from that, but it depends on that given situation. So those two questions, those two answers are the more comfortable you get in your own shoes as a coach, as a trainer, as a therapist, a clinician, is I think something that really draws people to you. At first, I was scared as a young trainer, as a coach, to say, I don't know, right? Because that's going to make people think I'm not good enough. The more I say I don't know, the less I say, the more confident our people are with me. And so that gets expressed. So, and that comes from having the reps and having to know that I have a system behind me that's going to catch any of my misses.
For sure. Developing that system or taking your course and learning from the systems that you've built for other people to benefit from. Speaking of which, where can people find out more about the two of you, and where can people find your website to sign up for your course?
So as far as the course and our joint venture together here, it's principlesofprogramdesign.com. You can follow us. We're Principles of Program Design on Instagram, on Facebook. We're PPD Education on Twitter. We don't do a whole lot on Twitter, to be honest with you. But those are the two big two. On our website, you can also, like I said, check out our free preview course for the online course. And then individually, you could reach me at ericdagati.com, ERICDAGATI.com, and all my social media is on there as well. And then Mike has his stuff as well as his Skill of Strength stuff to tell you about.
Yeah, so our gym is called Skill of Strength, and you can find us at skillofstrength.com. We're located in North Chelmsford, Massachusetts. The best way to sort of look at what I'm doing is probably Instagram at Coach Mike Perry. And that's where we do a lot of our talks and where I put a lot of my content. But you can also check out Skill of Strength on Instagram as well. And occasionally I'm on Facebook, but those are probably the best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate all of your expertise and knowledge, and great seeing both of you guys.
Thank you, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you like this episode, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and share this episode with a friend who you think would enjoy hearing it. Additionally, if you want to help support this podcast and keep future episodes going, please check out our links below where you can support us directly or through engaging in any of our affiliate marketing links. Last, please make sure you check us out on social media at Brawn Body and leave a 5-star review, especially if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify.